another episode of Sessions with Mary Jane. I'm your host, Jordan Freed, spelled like fried because I most definitely am. I am back with a solo episode because sometimes guests are hard to get, you know? If you ever want to be a guest on this podcast, definitely shoot me a DM because I'm always looking for people with something to promote outside of the people I go to first off and hit up to come on the show. So I appreciate you guys coming out for this very special episode. This is going to be like our first ever concept episode. So concept episodes are pretty much just going to be me talking about something that you might want to learn more about. And today I decided to hop into the world of stand-up comedy because a lot of people come up to me when I tell them that I am a stand-up comedian. And they're like, oh my gosh, my friends always told me I should try stand-up comedy. And now you are here and you are watching this podcast. And this is going to be your guide to stand-up comedy. A little bit of background on me and my stand-up comedy career was I started about a little over 13 years ago. Technically, I guess 14 years ago if you want the first time I ever tried stand-up comedy on a stage. And I actually auditioned for my school's talent show my sophomore year of high school. Unfortunately, I was underprepared and had some jokes but didn't say any of them and kind of just improv'd it on stage. And needless to say, it wasn't very funny. But I learned a lot from this mistake. Maybe not a mistake. Maybe it was a healthy accident to go up on stage without saying my material and being super nervous and embarrassing myself in front of the whole panel of people at Warwick Valley High School that were picking the talent show attendees. But it kind of made me think about stand-up in a totally different way because to somebody who might be a new stand-up comedian, you might think, oh, they're just going up there and winging it. But stand-up comedians are not winging it. The best ones seem as though they're winging it, but every great stand-up comedian has thought of the idea ahead of time. That's not to say that things don't come out organically during a set and people might not do what's known as writing on the stage. But in general, stand-up comedy is a written art form and it is performed to be a rehearsed monologue or at least a fluid kind of array of things that you've written in the past. So I came back my junior year, I auditioned for the talent show again and I made it. And that was the only time I think anybody did stand-up comedy at the talent show while I was in high school. And the show was a pretty good success. Like, looking back on it, I by no means have amazing jokes, but for the setting and the amount of people that were there, it was good. People laughed. I got my first experience and probably performed for the most people I've ever performed for in my first real stand-up comedy show, which was a talent show. And then from there, I started going to open mics, an open mic known as CV's Hideaway in Central Valley, New York, which kind of started me out. And I had a lot of very awesome people, Dan DiMarino, Eric Duffy, who now lives in North Carolina, R.I.P. Dave Lovey. And these were some of the people who out of the gate were like very supportive of my stand-up comedy growth as a high schooler going to bars and doing stand-up comedy. Without types of people like this, as a young person, I don't think I would have been able to progress like I have. I continued to do stand-up comedy at open mics, and went off to college, studied digital media production in New Orleans, where I continued to do open mics, and I produced shows there in the Hudson Valley when I would be home. And then when I got back, I just kept producing shows in the Hudson Valley, New York, and then eventually I moved to New Jersey in 2018 and 2019 on and off, and I've been in New Jersey ever since. And I shot my first ever comedy special, When the Edible Hits, and that is now on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, and you could get a vinyl copy of it on Elastic Stage. So if you have interest after watching this to dive further into my stand-up comedy career, that's where you go. Just search When the Edible Hits, Jordan Freed, spelled like fried because I'm a stoner and that's how it is, and you could find it there. But let's jump into the guide to stand-up comedy. Jordan Freed's guide to stand-up comedy. By no means is this the be-all, end-all of stand-up comedy advice. I am just a person who's been doing it a long time and seen friends of mine find success. I've seen other friends of mine dwindle out and quit. So this is kind of where we are getting into it. I'd like to start out by saying if you do stand-up comedy, there's no guarantee that you end up on Comedy Central or end up on Netflix or end up having a viral clip. So if that's why you're doing stand-up comedy, that might not be the best reason to do stand-up comedy. It's a very crowded market, so going into stand-up comedy, you have to have a reason for doing it, you know? It's not enough anymore that your friends said you were funny and you think it would be a fun thing to do stand-up comedy. You know, oh, I lost a fantasy football draft, now I'm a stand-up comedian. As much as that seems like a fun idea, stand-up comedy is a terrible way of life. Sure, you'll meet some very interesting people and you're part of the life of the party, but a lot of it is just sitting at bars with drunks and being out late at night and having to drive far away or wait 2 hours to get 3 minutes of comedy in, or wait 8 hours because you just drove to a gig out in Pittsburgh or something like that, you know? So don't get into stand-up comedy for the fame and glory. The only reason you should be getting into stand-up comedy is because you love the art form and it makes you feel good to write jokes and see that instant gratification. Before you get into stand-up comedy, you have to do your homework, you know? A lot of people get into stand-up comedy and they haven't done their research. They haven't watched other comedians. If you're about to become a stand-up comedy, you should be watching hours and hours of stand-up comedy. You know, this is how you find out who is actually doing it, who's a professional, and what types of things have been successful around this time. When I was first starting to get into stand-up comedy, I was a little cheap Jew. I'm Jewish, so I could make this comment. But I used to buy things on Amazon because I maybe had an iPod Touch or an iPod Shuffle or something like that when I was in middle school or high school. And I was looking for songs to buy on Amazon or on Apple Music, which was just iTunes back then. And I would try to look for the longest song because all the songs were 99 cents. So I thought, what is the longest song? And then I discovered Dane Cook. Dane Cook was the biggest comedian on the planet when I was in 7th and 8th grade. This is like around 07, 08. And his songs were very long, you know, whether it was the BK Lounge or one of his other bits. I started listening to that. You know, I downloaded a bunch of his stand-up jokes that were like 7 or 8 minutes long, and I started listening to those. And then from there, I started watching as much stand-up comedy as possible. I would watch Chris Rock when it would come on HBO late at night. I had the early Netflix streaming, which like it was DVDs. Then all of a sudden they put limited amounts of content for free if you had the DVD service. And then I watched Zach Galifianakis live from the Purple Onion. And then from Zach Galifianakis, I started discovering Mitch Hedberg. I discovered Dimitri Martin. I got back into Carlin. Louis C.K. was becoming the top comic on the planet. So I was kind of starting to watch all of these people, watch Comedy Central half hours, Comedy Central Presents every second I got. I was watching comedy all the time. It was just like when I was home, I was turning cable to Comedy Central and I was watching it all the time. So this was kind of what informed my early stand-up. I definitely realized I was more of a joke teller, so that Mitch Hedberg, Zach Galifianakis type thing. But you have to decide what is the funniest part about you. Are you a great storyteller? Do you do impressions? Are you just a great writer and you see the irony in life? These are all ways that you could start to figure out what your persona is going to be. And this is huge. There are literally thousands of comedians in the New York and New Jersey area. So, why are you doing stand-up if you're going to do the same thing as everyone else? You should only jump into stand-up if you have some kind of idea about what's missing from the stand-up world or how you differ from people, or getting really granular with your specificity and making sure that people understand that you're something different, or you have a perspective. One thing that people talk about a lot in stand-up is your point of view. What is your point of view? Is it unique? How could it be more unique? Your point of view should be true to you or true to your character. So are you a Republican? Are you a Democrat? Are you a leftist? Are you a libertarian? These are intro things. What is your perspective? Oh, I'm a Jewish woman. I am a Muslim man. I am a African immigrant, these are all things you could kind of focus on. Oh, I'm from Minnesota. Oh, I had a weird job. Oh, I have this family situation that makes me unique. When you're starting out as a stand-up, it's your job to figure out what makes you unique. Otherwise, you're just going to be like everybody else, regurgitating talking points that Lenny Bruce said, or Richard Pryor said, or George Carlin said, and basically coming up with stuff that isn't that original. And it's really hard to be original when there's literally tens of thousands of comedians within a 30-mile radius of you if you live in the New York, New Jersey area. So I would say that is what you should be thinking about before you actually get into doing stand-up comedy. Who are you? What are you trying to be? What are the funniest parts about you that you want to exaggerate? And then make that stuff happen. I know what I look like. That's a big thing in stand-up comedy. What do you look like? What do people expect you to sound like? What do they expect you to talk about? What people expect you to talk about and what people think about when they look at you, you could either play into that, which is really great for marketing, somebody like Zarna Garg, who is an Indian mother who has tons of followers, and she talks about things that you would kind of expect an Indian mom to talk about. She's wildly successful for not playing against expectations. She is wildly successful because she plays into the expectations of what you think she would talk about. Somebody like Bert Kreischer or something, he comes out with his shirt off, he's drinking a beer, you expect him to tell party stories. So whatever you look like, you could either be playing into what you look like, or you flip it on your head, like something like John Mulaney, where he looks very clean cut and composed, but he was really a drug addict, and his stories might be a little crazier, and he has this razor thin wit that makes you think about the world in a different way. These are all things to think about, I think somebody like Mark Maron is a great example. He gives the idea that he's just an angry man, but he's really a sensitive man. He gets very angry about things, but it's because he is sensitive. So take these all into account when you're coming up with your character. What do you feel strongly about? And how are you going to implement that? Now, when it comes to your first set, I would generate a lot of material. This might be a month of generating material. It might be a whole year to 2 years before you even get up on stage. But I would get a very good 5 minutes that you are confident with and you feel good about saying, and it is unique to you. and then I would get ready to go. If you're a storyteller, you really only need 1 to 2 stories for your open mic sets. Most open mics are 5 minutes. So if you could fill up 5 minutes, and that could be timing yourself at home, you could ask your friends, hey, watch this. But I would figure out how much material you actually have. If you have like 10 jokes that are one-liners, it's going to be a quick set. Not to say that you can't go up on stage with 10 one-liners and be like, this is what I got tonight. But you probably want to get yourself to a point where you're confident enough to go up there and tell your jokes, and also you have enough material to work with. Not to say that you can't always be perfecting 1 minute of material, but if you have 5 minutes, it gives you more to work with, more time to fill, so that you don't feel inclined to be like, oh, I'm going off stage early all the time. Like, I feel like I'm leaving people wanting too much more. I feel like I don't even leave them with an impact because I'm up there so short and then I get up. So I would keep a notebook that is analog, and I would keep a notebook that is digital. The analog notebook is to keep you without distractions. This could be a composition book. It could be a tiny notepad. It could be a big binder. But whatever you need to be focused, I would make sure you have a version of that. So I have a bunch of notebooks, and over the years I've had tons of notebooks. I have varied from writing out my sets word for word to just writing important points. But this is how you become a comedian, is you have an analog notebook, you write down the jokes, and you figure out what's funny, and you have an opportunity to edit yourself before you get on stage. You don't want to get up on stage without having edited yourself and thinking about it after the initial idea. Ideas can be funny to you in the moment, but to make sure that they translate to stage, you have to give them a little time to marinate. You have to cook them up. You can't just expect it to be a great bit just because you thought, oh, this would be funny. You kind of just start with a premise. A premise is just a funny idea. And then from there, you build it out. You might need a setup to get people on board with the idea and set their expectations in a certain place before you get there. And then it's the punchline. Or the punchlines. A great joke has many punchlines, or tags, as we like to call them in the stand-up world. So your job as a starting stand-up is come up with as many punchlines and tags for any premise you have. Oh, it's funny how people don't use their blinkers. Okay, come up with every punchline you could come up with about people not using their blinkers. That is why it's good to have an analog notebook. You're just vomiting out on the page everything funny that you could think of. You're not editing yourself in that moment. That's coming later, the editing of these premises and ideas of punchlines. But your goal is to just get it out there. Make sure you have mass and quantity. You want to have stuff that you could put out into the world. If you have a bunch of jokes going, then you might want to edit them. How do they fit together? How can you transition them? Since I do one-liners, when I'm starting with the jokes, they'll be kind of non sequiturs. They won't have a transition that works. I'll just say one joke at a time and then move on to a completely different topic. But if I'm trying to build a longer set and a complete work, I try to categorize all my one-liners into a thematic idea. These are all jokes about working out. These are all jokes about my girlfriend. These are all jokes about living in New Orleans. These are all jokes about growing up in the Hudson Valley. This is definitely a hack for me because you're creating a show. Comedy is a show, the same as wrestling, the same as a musical. So you want to leave people with an impact after every time you go on stage. Like, why did they watch this? What did they gain from watching this? Did they get entertainment out of it? Did they learn something new? Did they gain a new perspective about your way of life? Did you make them think differently? These are all reasons to say something and make a show. This is once again imploring you to ask the why. Why are you doing stand-up comedy? If it's just to get more followers, that's not going to happen, you know? But if you really have an idea of who you want to be and you have a unique character that you don't see in the world, then that's where you got to come from, and you got to put that out into the world, you know? From there, you're going to see all of your jokes. You're going to see your punchlines. If you're a storyteller, maybe you record on a voice device and you're like, all right, I'm going to tell the story of me shitting my pants at Port Authority or something like that. You know, it sounds very hack, and a lot of people do tell shitting their pants stories, or the first time they had sex stories, or a time they blacked out stories. But what is your story, and how is it different for the world? You know, is it how you tell the story that's unique? The best storytellers have a unique way of telling stories. And then somebody like maybe a Jerry Seinfeld, when he's telling a story, he's focusing on the odd details, you know, he's looking at things that you don't normally look at. So figure out how to find details that people might not necessarily notice in their lives, but they have universal truths about them. And if you're telling a story, tell it the way you would tell it, and tell it the way that only you could tell it. These are all super important when you are creating a set. I'm not a huge storyteller, but if I'm telling a story, I know that I am not a great storyteller, so it's really going to be about what I say and how I say it. It's going to be about whether or not these punchlines are actually funny, because I'm not a gifted storyteller. So that's kind of my advice for just creating the first set. You know, try to have a couple of different jokes that explore different topics. You don't necessarily want to be one note as a comedian, because that kind of limits you. You know, there's always going to be new explorations you do and new ideas that you explore, but you kind of want to show people out of the gate. Like, when I started out, I was talking about being a high schooler. I was talking about being young. I was talking about going to college soon. I was talking about the difference between adults and kids. These are things that was my unique perspective, universal in that there's a lot of kids and teens in the world, and everybody has been a kid or teen if they are now an adult. But I wasn't trying to be the wisest person on the planet. I wasn't necessarily trying to talk about the truths of being an adult. You know, most of my jokes were funny because I might not have understood the world, or I might have made a joke that was purposefully ill-informed about things. So that was kind of how I informed what I did on stage. So you finally have material, you're reading it, you think it's funny, you tried it with a couple of your homies, they think it's a little funny. Where do you go from there? Almost every stand-up comedian starts at open mics. Now, open mics are great. They are the best place to try your material in the first 5 years of doing comedy, and people at all ranges of comedy still do open mics. An open mic is usually a free or low-cost way to get guaranteed stage time, whether it's 5 minutes, 7 minutes, 3 minutes, 10 minutes, or some mics 15 minutes even. Open mics do not have a lot of barriers to entry unless they're specialized mics, so they might have a queer-focused open mic where they want LGBT personas. But in general, open mics mean anybody could go there. You just have to sign up either in advance or on the day of at the designated sign-up time, and you will be placed in a lineup. Now, when you go to an open mic, you either get to choose your order, or it might be a bucket mic, or it might be a curated open mic where people add their names to the list, and then the producer of the open mic puts you in the order. I personally think the best mics are the ones where they're curated and the producer of the open mic makes the order themselves, just because usually the person producing an open mic knows the people who are coming to the open mic. They know the audience, and they know the level of quality of the people who are coming in. And anybody who's ever done an open mic before knows that an open mic can be killed because a few bad performers in a row come up on stage and alienate the audience, or they piss off the venue. Your job as an open mic producer or an open mic goer is to make people happy that they saw this free comedy show. Make people happy that they saw amateur comedy, which is very hard to do. It's hard to make people think that amateur comedy is good, especially if they are being what I call ambushed, which is what a lot of open mics are. You know, people show up and they didn't even know that there was going to be a stand-up comedy show happening. And because of that, they are oftentimes not open to all material, or they might be offended more easily, or they might get upset if you're trying to distract them from the baseball game that they're trying to watch at the bar that you're performing at. So your job is, even if people aren't there to see you, is to leave them with a memory and give them something that is welcome to them. You're never trying to fight with the audience. The audience is never wrong. You know, there are people in the audience who might like you more, and there might be different audiences that like you more or less, but you're there to entertain the audience. If that's 5 white women who are 65, you got to figure out what they want to listen to. If it's 30 black people ranging from the age of 22 to 40, like, you got to tailor your set a little bit to that, you know? There are jokes that you will have that will be universal to everyone, but people get different references. Your job is to adjust to that. You know, if you're doing a show for frat bros who are all in college, they're going to think things are funny in a different way than people who are graduated and have kids and have houses and mortgages, you know? So this is kind of a way that you could take your perspective and play with it. You know, if I go into rooms sometimes and everybody is older than my mom and dad, you know, so I have to remember that they might not get my references as much. You know, I have to do more universal jokes, or do jokes that make me the laughing stock, or make young people the laughing stock, or if there's a lot of women in the crowd, make men the laughing stock, you know? You could always figure out how to bring new perspectives into your set. Like, one day you'll have plenty of fans and they'll know exactly what to see and what to expect from you, and you'll have no issues, and you'll just be like, oh yeah, everybody's here to see me. I'm going to say whatever I want. I'm going to do an hour. And that's what my special was like. I got to tell all of my niche jokes because I knew people were coming to see me and they wanted to give me the benefit of the doubt. And they knew what I was putting down, you know? They were people who come from my world and know the references. But if you're doing a show in Manhattan, you might be performing for a lot of tourists, you know? If you're doing a show that is in the Hudson Valley, you're doing a show for people that live in the country and might not like Democrats, and they might not like Republicans. They might not like anybody, you know? They might be more conservative. So you got to look into who your audience is, because the audience is always right, you know? You're always going to have different audiences, so sometimes you got to take your shows with a grain of salt, you know? Not every night's going to be your night, but you got to give it your best shot every time. If you get the opportunity to sign up your own name on the list, so this is back to the signups for stand-up comedy, that is kind of a way that you can control the night a little bit. If you're a younger, newer comic, I would say definitely do not go immediately in the lineup. You know, the first couple of slots are for people who want to get out of the mic early. They're for people who are very experienced and they will kill no matter what. Or they're people who get really nervous and want to go up first or second. But otherwise, I would say the best spots in an open mic lineup are the 5th to 9th spots. Somewhere around there are great spots for beginners. You know, you never want to be in the last third of an open mic, because a lot of people will get tired of watching comedy. People might leave the bar, especially if comedians before you aren't that great. But going around 4, 5, 6, 7-ish, those are places where the crowd is already warmed up. You already got to watch 4 or 5 comics so that you could see, oh, this is what they like. this is the type of thing that they will agree with, or these are the things that they don't like. Oh, I just saw that they don't like raunchy jokes, so I'm going to edit out some of my sex jokes so that they're not alienated. Oh, somebody started talking about politics. They really liked that politics stuff, so that means I can tell my politics stuff. Oh, but are my politics jokes different than the people before me? These are all things that should be going through your head, and you get the advantage of doing when you are a later spot in the order. So keep that in mind when you're signing up. Once you start to get up, you got to figure out what your routine is. You know, do you always like to pee before you go up? Do you have a beer? Do you smoke a joint? If you're starting up and you have no crutches, that's the best way to go. Like, I started doing comedy in high school. I wasn't drinking. I wasn't smoking. I just went up. And sure, I was super nervous every time I'd go up on stage and develop vocal tics and walk back and forth because I was so nervous. But it's a natural way to get more comfortable on stage and really just be open and honest. If you're not doing drugs or drinking, it's easier to remember your sets too, you know? So keep that in mind. It's not to say if you have a little bit of nerves, don't have a beer before you go up on stage, you know, don't have that shot of whiskey, you know, like, do that. If it makes you feel loose and you want to go up on stage and do that, do that. You'll also be a friend to the bar if you're always getting a drink when you go to the bar. You know, sometimes there's a drink minimum at open mics. Sometimes the bars don't really have a lot of people in the bar on that night that the open mic's happening. So if you can support the bar and you want to support the bar, definitely support the bar. That is one of the best things you could do to keep a stand-up comedy scene alive, is buying drinks. So, obviously, if you're sober or you don't drink that way, you know, don't do that. You know, try to save money and try to keep a clear head. But if you're somebody who drinks on a regular basis anyway, you're helping out by grabbing a Coors Light before you get up on stage, or grabbing a craft beer for the night. If you smoke weed, you know, I like to smoke weed before sets now, but it's more to deal with the nerves before getting on stage. I don't like to be super high when I get on stage, but if it's 2 hours before a show, I might smoke weed so that for the next 2 hours, I'm chill. I'm thinking kind of clearly in my stoner brain, but I'm not like forgetting things, and my short-term memory loss is really bad, you know? Yeah, so whatever makes you feel comfortable, you should do that before getting on stage. Obviously, alcoholism and drug abuse is not good for stand-up, because you're going to forget your jokes. You're going to miss sets. You're going to piss people off. I've definitely had moments in my life where I have been too drunk and pissed people off, you know, and I feel bad for that. Shout out Phil Mike in DC. I got very drunk on Lexapro once, and I pissed him off a lot doing one of his shows, like, I don't even know, 8 years ago or something. So definitely do not make enemies for yourself. This is a good segue to talk about the life of a comedian, you know? You're going to be around a lot of different types of people, and your job as a comedian is to be friends with everyone, you know? Make friends with the person who just started comedy. Make friends with the person who's been doing comedy for 20 years, you know? You don't have to be friends with everyone, but these are your coworkers, and your teamwork will help each other do better, you know? If you have people who you could bounce ideas off of, or you can kind of be inspired by, or they could warm up the crowd for you so that your set is easier, that's really going to help you out, you know? That's something that can be helpful for you in the long run. Also, not to mention, stand-up can be very lonely. So if you're not befriending the other comedians at the open mics, then you're going to be kind of sad. You're just going to be on your phone all night. You're going to be drinking beers by yourself. So be social and put yourself out there and talk to people. Ask people what they do for a living. Ask people where they live, you know? Don't be on your phone all the time. You're not going to get good jokes from being on your phone. You're going to get good jokes from living life and talking to strangers. Also, other comedians will probably get you your gigs. So you can't just be like, I'm the best comedian here. Like, you guys all suck. because that's not going to get you gigs, because when those people are booking their independent shows where they might pay you a drink ticket and $25, they're going to be like, I'm going to go with my homie who's actually nice to me and still gets people to laugh. They're way better than the person who gets more people to laugh, but they're not nice and they're not the homie. So keep that in mind, is that you can always build your network, and it's not really a competition if you're doing different things. Sure, there's going to be overlap where you have a comedian who kind of looks like you, or they kind of have the same style as you, or they kind of have the same demographics as you. Not to say that you can't be friends with them, but having very diverse friends helps you out a lot more in this industry. Because people want a comedy show that has a lot of different types of comedians. If your only friends are people who look like you, you're probably not going to get booked a lot. And if you do get booked, those shows are going to be bad. Like if you look at me and you're just like, oh yeah, I'd like to see Jordan Freed do comedy, but then you see the poster and there's a bunch of white guys with long hair and beards who smoke weed, you're going to be like, why did I need 5 of those? Whereas if you have like a diverse group of people with queer people, people of different ethnicities, people who are international, people who have different genders, this creates a well-rounded lineup where you definitely fill the holes. I never want to be one of 7 white people on a lineup. I want to be one guy out of 3 guys and 4 girls, or one bisexual man with a few straight guys and a few queer girls. I want to be on a lineup where there's Puerto Ricans. I want to be on a lineup where there's Indians. I want to be on a lineup where there's Persians. Diversity is great. And also your crowd will most likely be more diverse if you are hanging out with people who are diverse. It kind of is a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you are a white guy who hangs out with all white guys, that your ceiling is really just to sell tickets to all white guys. But if you have diverse friends and you're bringing out diverse crowds and you have diverse comics on your lineup, people of all nationalities, all religions, all ethnicities, and all genders and sexualities will want to come out to your show, because they're like, there's something for me. As long as people have something for them, they're going to come out to see you. So make friends. Hopefully they're diverse friends. Hopefully they don't all look like you. And don't make the same mistakes that other people have made. If you have people who are willing to talk to you, who have already done stand-up, talk to them. Ask them how they get their gigs. Ask them what they're doing. People will give you very good advice, and they'll respect you for respecting them. There's a lot of karma in comedy, so definitely be nice to people and be open to advice that people have. If people say that, oh, I go to this place all the time, it's a really good place to do shows, the crowd is good, that is very helpful for you, because then when you have to test jokes for your eventual shows, then you can go there and test it and be like, wow, there was a good crowd. Whereas a lot of open mics are just comedians. And maybe when you're starting out, that isn't that bad. But if you're doing open mics for just comedians, 1, they're not going to be surprised because they've already seen your jokes. So they're already not going to be as effective as jokes. 2, they're not buying comedy tickets on a regular basis. Like, the people who are going to buy tickets to your shows are the people who aren't comedians. So it's always good to find open mics that have real audiences of normal civilians, so that for a fact, like, normal people find this funny. I talk about this all the time with my comedy friends, but comedians are kind of irony poisoned. And what I mean by that is, we've been on the internet. We see Twitter all day. We've watched thousands of hours of stand-up comedy. We think dead baby jokes are funny. We think pedophile jokes are funny. We think random things are funny that aren't actually funny to a normal person, And this is why, marijuana, it makes you forget things sometimes. And I just forgot where I was going with this comment. but I'm going to get back on track because I am a professional, and that's what professionals do. They get you back on track. Comedians are irony poisoned. So it's not easy to test a joke on a comedian because they might not find something funny because they have a warped sense of humor. You got to test things on normal people who have kids, people who are in college, people who go to weddings all the time, people who go to bachelor parties all the time, like people who have boring ass jobs. Like those are the people who have money. They're going out and about, they're going on dates, they're going out with groups of friends, and you want to make sure it's funny to them. It doesn't, like, you want the respect of your peers, but it doesn't really matter if your peers find you funny if you can't sell tickets and you can't grow your audience. So make friends with comics, but at open mics, you want to perform for as many strangers as possible. You know, say your name at the beginning and end of your set when you're starting out because people don't know who you are and you need to brand it. R.I.P. to Anthony Quinn, a New Jersey comic, but he was right on the dot with this. He would say, "I'm Anthony Quinn, like I have a baby." And whatever his stand-up was, I might not remember a lot of his jokes, but I do remember that he said his name a bunch of times. And, you know, I'm sure a lot of people who were going to his shows and open mics remembered that Anthony Quinn did comedy. So use your name. Put your name out there as much as possible because an open mic is still a show. Even though you're not paid for it, you're still doing comedy. Take every open mic seriously. Even if there's one civilian in the crowd, like that is somebody you could have an impact on. And chances are, if you have a small crowd, there's more of a likelihood that that person will have a massive impact and remember you more. You know, think about that. Like if you saw your favorite stand-up comedian and you were the only person there and they made a show catered to you and commented on things that were only happening in the moment, like that is a special moment. It's almost more special than a show with 300 people there where you're just doing what's already rehearsed. So never underestimate the power of 1 to 10 people in the crowd, you know? If you perform a big show, you might get no followers after it. But if you have only 1 to 10 people, you could see those 1 to 10 people and go talk to them and be like, "Hey, I'm doing stand-up. I post clips. Can you follow me on Instagram? Oh, I post stuff on my YouTube. Oh, I have a podcast. Do you want to listen to it?" So don't think of low crowds as always being a bad thing. I also think of it as 300 people is always an easier show. Laughter is contagious. You want as many people as possible. You want somebody laughing so that the people next to them feel comfortable and elicit laughter as well. But if there's only 3 people in the audience, then you could see easily, oh, that person found it funny. That person did not find it funny. That person did find it funny. Cool. If this was a bigger crowd, I could hope that maybe 2/3 of the audience would find it funny, which isn't really good when there's 3 people in the audience, but it multiplies and it could become a big thing once you have more people in the audience, you know? If there's 10 people in the audience and none of them find you funny, you're doing something wrong. Even if it's 10 people, it's not their fault, you know? They still came to laugh. Even if there's just one person in the audience who has never seen you before, look at their face. Find out what they find funny. They can be your test. You know, it could be awkward sometimes, you know, if there's only one person in the audience. But if they're willing to laugh when nobody is around them and they're in this awkward, weird comedy situation, your joke is probably good or at least interesting. And that's something I want to stress to anybody who's ever going to try to do stand-up comedy. It doesn't always have to be laugh out loud funny. You don't always have to kill, but you do have to be interesting. Once again, you do stand-up comedy shows. What are you showing? You know? I literally try every show to leave people with a memory. Even if I don't have a good set, I'm going to say some crazy stuff about the moment that will make people remember my set. A oh, you didn't like that joke? Well, you didn't like that joke because you don't know this thing, you know? There are many different ways you could play into the moment. But even if a joke doesn't go over well, it doesn't mean it's a failure. Is it interesting? Are people paying attention to you? You've lost if they're talking to each other. If people in the audience are talking to each other, you've lost. If the people at the bar are all talking to each other, you've lost. But if people are giving you eye contact and watching you, even if they're not enjoying it and laughing per se, you still won. You got their attention, and that's the biggest thing. You know, an open mic is to test material. So a bad joke is just a test that failed. That's not necessarily a bad thing on you. You're supposed to take risks in open mics. You're supposed to see if something is universal that you thought was unique to you. That is really your way into stand-up comedy, is to see the people's reaction and then judge it. The good thing is if you start generating a lot of material, which you should, as I like to call it, your brain starts to think in the stand-up comedy language, where you have a thought and you're like, all right, I had this thought, let me make it into joke mode. And then you just spit it out, and that is a joke. Once you start thinking in stand-up comedy, you'll start generating way more material. And then once you start generating more material, it will be more exciting and interesting to you. It won't be about, oh, I'm doing the same 5 minutes. It'll be like, oh, I'm rotating through the 15 minutes that I have. Oh, nice. Do we have a special guest?
We do.
What's up?
Hi.
We could actually pause this for a sec. All right. We are back from our nice little break right there. And I guess the question you're asking is, what happens when you start to get good? You've had some open mics where you're starting to get laughs. It seems promising, and you feel as though your time is coming, and you're like, I think I'm ready. You know, you're looking to get on a show. So the difference between a show and a mic is you are preordained to be there, or the show has tickets, or you are getting specifically booked by a person. This is the difference between a show and an open mic. Kind of in between there are contests. And when you're starting out, you might want to do contests, but I wouldn't go to contests until you have some kind of likelihood of winning the contest, you know? Contests could always be good shows because they're sometimes judged by audience, and comics who want to win will bring out their audiences. But sometimes contests are kind of a trap because only one person can win. So unless you win, you can't really say that the contest is a credit per se. You could only wait until you win a few times and be like, I won the contest at so-and-so venue. But contests are great because you see people bringing their A game. They're a good place to bring your A game. Everybody's bringing out people for the audience votes if that's how it's scored. Obviously, if you're not winning a lot of contests, then it might be bad for your morale. So think about that, I guess. But contests could be a great way, a gateway into doing shows, because sometimes they do feel like shows. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. Sorry, needed some stoner water right there. Sponsored by the water fountain that I got this water from. So contests kind of in between an open mic and a show, you know, like you might have to pay a submission fee. If you're paying a submission fee, hopefully the prize is a cash prize. Like if you're just paying a submission fee and you're not getting anything from that, it doesn't really make sense to do that, you know. You shouldn't try to pay to get a club spot. Like that's gonna become a slippery slope if people realize you'll pay to get good opportunities, because then they'll just be like, oh, we'll keep getting them to pay into it instead of passing them along to what is the actual thing that you have to do, you know. I don't know. That's just my mentality with it. Other people might have different opinions on it. So you want to get booked on a show. How do you get booked on a show? One, it's what I was talking about earlier. talking to your fellow comics. Like, most comics will produce their own shows, so you can find out who produces the good shows in your area or shows of your level in your area, and you could try to get on those and talk to the comics who run those and be like, hey, I saw you run a show. Like, I'd love to be in consideration for one of the future shows. And usually that's how you'll get a lot of work, especially when you're an amateur pro-level comic where you're kind of straddling both sides of that. So that's like a very good way to get work. And you could also, like I said, go up to people who don't look like you, book people who don't look like you. Because that's how you'll probably find more opportunities, as opposed to a lot of shows. Like, if I go and ask somebody to get on their shows, it might take 4 or 5 months because they already booked a lot of men on their show or something of that nature. So definitely be aware of that when you're looking for opportunities for shows. Other ways to get on shows is by having a really good tape. So while you're at an open mic, you can get footage of yourself. And if you have a very good open mic set with a lot of audience laughs where you really command the room, you could use that to submit to shows. So even if you've never done a show before, you could start showing examples of what your work would be like so that people are trying to watch that. If you don't have a good tape, that will oftentimes be the thing that stops you from getting gigs. Like, comedy festivals, which have a lot of shows and opportunities, will not take you if you have a bad tape. You need a tape, you know? You want strangers to book you on their shows because there's only so many producers you know. And a lot of times that's your first impression with a producer who might end up being your best friend. But if you do not get in the door with a good video, you might never create that connection. You can cold call people if you have a good tape. You can submit. A lot of comedy clubs or comedy shows have submissions, especially if you're going on the road. Like, there's a lot of different systems in different cities, so always look for that. Every scene is going to be different, you know? Like, I was down in New Orleans for 4 years, and they would have maybe 1 or 2 booked shows a night, and maybe they were paid. And then most of the scene was open mic, because if people weren't booked on the shows, they would go to the open mics because they still wanted to get a set, and it wasn't a big enough metro that people were trying to book tons and tons of shows every single day. That's something for you to figure out, is like, how many shows are in my metro? Do I have to go to a different area to get shows? Like, if you're in New Jersey, do you have to go to New York City? If you're in the Hudson Valley, do you have to go up to Dutchess County, like, and get to Poughkeepsie or something like that? These are all things to consider when you start doing it. You know, when you start out at open mics, you could be going to music open mics in small towns if they don't have comedy infrastructure. You know, you don't have to be left out. Like, small towns have talent shows. They have opportunities for you to get on stage. But what you really want is a place that has a cultivated scene and people are already bringing attention to comedy. So all you have to do is go to the places that people are already going for comedy and do your magic. You know, if you practice really hard and you're always ready, you'll find good situations, and people will tell you about more opportunities and more places to do comedy. Because once you start booking shows, that's how you get booked on other shows, because people who are on those shows will see you, they'll see you do well, they'll be like, oh, I could really use a comic like that on my shows. And then they will book you and get more opportunities. And everything's about referrals. You know, like, all of the major clubs in New York City, like, you kind of have to get referred to get in there. Like, they claim they have new talent nights and stuff like that, and sometimes they will pick people from new talent nights. But oftentimes a lot of these clubs are just like, hey, my buddy's really funny. And it's like, oh, okay, cool. And it's like, oh, somebody canceled. And it's like, oh, your buddy's really funny? Okay, they get to go up tonight. So make sure you're networking if you want shows, because otherwise you're not going to get shows, because people have to know who you are. Otherwise, they would book the other 10,000 comics that they do know. There's so many comedians. So getting booked on any shows, free or paid, is a very big deal, you know? Free shows are definitely easier to get on because they're not paid, so there's some comics that won't do those shows anymore. But free shows also sometimes have big crowds because the show is free for people to come in. If you're not being paid for a show, people coming in shouldn't be paying for the show. Unless you're doing a guest spot, that would be an example of a free show that you're offering on a paid show. Is you're just like, hey, could I get on the lineup? I heard you sold a lot of tickets. And they're like, yeah, sure, you could get on the lineup, do 5 to 10 minutes, and keep the crowd alive, and maybe I'll give you a drink. But if somebody's selling tickets and the room is packed, like, you should be getting paid if you're a comedian and you're on a show. Obviously, it's different if it's like an open mic or it's a competition where only one person gets paid or maybe the host gets paid. But if you're on a show and people are paying, you should probably get paid, especially if they're coming to see you. After a certain point, you have to ask yourself when you're getting on other people's shows and you're bringing out people to their shows, like, oh, should I just do my own show? You know, if you could bring 10 to 15 people out to every show, you might as well have your own show, because that is a good enough base to start a comedy show and then get other people on the show who will invite their friends, and then you promote it to strangers and say, hey, there's a really good show happening. It's because these people are on it, you know, or we have these features of the show, or this is a special event or a special thing that's happening in the show. It's somebody's comedy special taping. It's a sketch comedy show with stand-up. It's an LGBT show, something like that. So definitely try to market yourself and book your own comics once you start to get more experienced, because if you have control over the show, you can do it how you want. Like, a lot of people host their own shows so that they're ever present in it, and they come after every comic and can do a couple jokes or something like that. But there's also the other way of going about it, where you book a show so that you just get a set on everyone, or you just book a show so that you could book the comics and you always just stay behind the scenes, and then comics remember you when they're booking their own shows, and they're like, hey, that person was nice to me, they're funny, I'll put them on the show. So keep all of that in mind when you're looking for shows. There's really only 3 ways of getting on shows, is like asking your friends about it, having a tape and submitting to strangers, or producing your own shows. So you got to figure out what level you're at, what is open to you. And once you start getting good, you'll hopefully be getting paid to do it, you know? But in order to get paid, you have to be able to do long amounts of time. Like, you're going to be expected to do 10 to 15 minutes if you're a host. And you're going to have to be present for the whole show. If you're a feature, you'll have to do 15 to 20 minutes. And if you're a headliner, which are the people who make the big bucks, you got to have 45 minutes to an hour if you're a true headliner. And people have to want to see you. So really, it's going to take probably like 1 to 3 or 4 years of open mics before you're like a good professional comic. A serviceable professional comic if you're really good. Like, it takes some people 10 years to become a professional comic and get paid. I think my first paid gig was maybe 6 months into doing stand-up, 5 months into doing stand-up, but it was in a place that didn't have a lot of comedy going on. Like, there were a lot of comics, and I definitely started to figure out how to get laughs, but you don't really get booked on all the shows until you're really doing it a lot of days a week for at least like 4 or 5 months, because you have to be comfortable on stage. People don't want to book somebody who's necessarily uncomfortable. Like, I definitely was uncomfortable in my first gig, and you'll definitely be uncomfortable in your gig, but you have to do your best to get comfortable on stage. And yeah, like, open mics are great. Like, treat it like a show. Like, if somebody came to see you, like, I'm going to make them laugh. I'm going to give them my best shot. I'm going to try out these new jokes. And that's the cool thing about stand-up, is it has immediacy. You can literally put out your stand-up the day you write it. the hour you write it. Like within a minute or two of going on stage, you could still be coming up with jokes. So enjoy that aspect, the moment. You know, everything is so digital now, but if you can make people who are there in person have a moment and an experience, they'll remember you forever. Because, like, in-person experiences are so different than being on your laptop and being on your phone. You know, the phone is meant to make you forget. It's meant to give you way too much information so that you can't possibly handle it all. But if somebody's going out to see you and they're laughing, that's an emotional attachment to what they're seeing. So if you could get them to do that, they will remember you for sure. They might not remember exactly what you said. They might not remember your name. But, you know, if you show up on a poster, they might come out because they saw you. Who knows? Like, I've had people say, like, oh, I followed you on Facebook, like, 7 years ago, and then I saw you were having this show in my area. I decided to come out. And it's just like, what? And it's like, yeah, like, if you do this enough, you'll start to gain people in who are actually invested in your career and want to see what you do and actually enjoy what you're putting down. With the internet, yeah, there's an unlimited audience. Like, you could really be as niche as you want and talk about whatever you want, and the audience is out there. There's no guarantee in your local area that there will be people who like your comedy. But hypothetically, I think there's an audience for every comedian somewhere in the world, even if they're spread out through many different types of towns, even if they're few and far between. There's an audience for everyone. So look for that audience, especially once you start doing shows. You'll get better tapes from the shows. You could invest in like more professional videography to make sure that you have something that can be posted on social media. And then ideally, once you're getting a show here and there, you could start posting clips, and those clips will hopefully get you views of random people, like TikToks and Reels. Those really draw in people who have never seen you before. And then hopefully from there, those Reels bring people out to your shows. And when they see your posts, or if you sponsor a post, they see it and they're like, oh, I remember them from Instagram. I remember them from TikTok. Oh, I think I've seen you before. And then from there, you start to get more followers. And then this gives more incentives to the better producers, the producers who pay shows that pay more, and shows that have more audiences, shows in theaters, shows in clubs, like getting full weekends. That's what happens when you have followers. If you don't have followers, you're not really going to be booking those types of shows. You know, you could always self-produce and work really hard to market in certain areas. But if you don't have thousands of followers or millions of followers, it's hard for places to justify paying you when you're coming to town. Like, you might be able to make money, but you're not going to be able to make enough money to live on comedy. Like, once you're 5 to 15 years into comedy, you should want to be paid like a higher level. Like, you should want to be in the headliner range. You would want to be in the feature range, the host range, where you're at least getting $100, if not $300, if not $500, if not $1,000. Because comedy is hard and it takes a lot of prep. So you definitely want to earn that, but you should be compensated once you get to that point. And finding compensation is hard sometimes. That's why a lot of comics go on the road, because there's a lot of shows in places that may not have comedy scenes, but people like comedy, just because there's not open micers doing comedy and producing independent shows. So if you can't get shows in your own area, try going out on the road. You know, find places that book comics, and maybe you're a great comic for what they're used to seeing. You know, everything is relative. Like, if you're not doing well in New York, well, New York is the hardest place to do stand-up in the world. Like, the best stand-up comedians are in New York. You're competing with all of that. But if you go to New Jersey, the level goes down a step. And then you go further out, the level might go down a step. Obviously, there are outliers in every area, and nobody's guaranteed to be good just because they're from New York City. But there are different levels because of the opportunities that are in cities. And the general level of the cities will dictate, you know. good comedy scenes are usually in cities that have good art scenes and places that have affordable rents, like the Pittsburghs of the world, the Ashevilles and Raleighs of the world, the the New Orleanses of the world. These are kind of alternative places that aren't New York and Los Angeles, where you can really cut your teeth, start to get paid for the first time, even get into the local clubs there. And a lot of local clubs in cities are chains. Levity Live is a chain of the Improv. Heliums and Bananas are the same companies. So any city that has those in them, they have a connection to the New York City and LA versions of those clubs. Especially if you start working a lot and you meet headliners from these clubs that come in for a weekend spot. If you're the guy that's sent out to open for these headliners, that's a way that you can meet people and they could take you on the road. Even if you're not getting paid a lot for that club show that night, maybe you're getting paid $100. These other comics who are coming into town might make $20,000 on a show and be able to pay you $3,000 to do a set. So look for those opportunities. Definitely don't be a star fucker, but meet people. If you have a good set, stay around and hang. Get very good at your craft so you don't have to be embarrassed about talking to people in your profession. That's a big thing. If people can sense your bullshit, they're not going to want to talk to you necessarily, especially if they're at a certain level. And they're trying to be professional and talk to other comics at the point. You could talk to anybody on a personal level, and that'll definitely help you to make connections. And once you're ready to be on their shows, they'll hit you up if you're friends on a personal level. But really being able to talk to people and be proud of what you're doing and know that you can get laughs, that is the most important thing. So if you don't feel that way yet, that's not a bad thing. It just means you have to get more comfortable and do open mics and stuff like that. So, yeah, once you get into festivals, once you get into comedy shows, you just got to keep performing. It's a numbers game. Every show you do, did you get any followers? Did you expose yourself to anybody new? This is how you build long-term success, and eventually you get to go on tour where you can make a lot of money because you're playing bigger venues and you're playing multiple nights in a row. You're doing multiple shows in a night possibly. And then from there, you can kind of decide what you want to do. Is stand up what you want to do? Then keep doing it. If you want to write, that should open up opportunities for you to write. If you want to act, that should open up opportunities for you to act. Because all of these industries are the same right now. They want social media followers. They want people who have a lot of views every day already. So then it's okay, we could take some of their views and put it into our context. So, yeah, that is the Jordan Freed guide to stand-up comedy. I hope you liked it. Leave some comments if you like. Maybe you thought this was bullshit, but hopefully you learned some things. This was really meant for beginners, but I'm sure some people are going to shit on this in the comments. And I'll say I told you so in the comments. But yeah, this was a fun one, and I hope I helped you get started on your stand-up journey.